Hello, my name is Jack George Abid. I'm a patent attorney and shareholder at the law firm of Allen Dyer, Duppel, and Gilchrist, and I'm doing a presentation for YouTube on student athletes and NIL changes. With that, I'll get into the presentation. A little bit about my background. I've gone to school for quite a long time, have allegiance to both SEC and ACC and Suncoast, and practical experience. I've been doing this for 15 years. Okay, so we'll get to the common questions. So with that, we'll get to the common questions for NIL. So the first thing is, what is NIL? So NIL stands for name, image, and likeness. Generally, any person may monetize their NIL as they see fit. The laws governing NIL rights are state-based, and some states grant differing degrees of rights and protection. Notwithstanding the standard right to NIL, NCAA scholarship athletes were previously prohibited from collecting income, including that derived from NIL rights. Under the prior regime, the student athlete or scholarship monetized their NIL, or for that matter, accepted any compensation outside their scholarship, they would be ruled ineligible by the NCAA. There's been some famous cases over the years. For example, AJ Green, Maurice Clarett, Reggie Bush, which was retroactive. But this has been something that's been endemic to the NCAA and its enforcement regime for the last 30, 40 years. The next question is the overview of the NIL changes for college athletes. So the NCAA has long defended the purely amateurism paradigm of college athletics. As part of this long-held position, the NCAA zealously chased after athletes who derived revenue from other activities. As support for NIL rights for student athletes grew, some stakeholders grew impatient with the snail-paced rate of change from the NCAA. Largely, the NCAA didn't want to make this change. They were compelled. The impatience that manifested itself in two primary ways: lobbying for legislative action at the federal and state levels, and litigation against the NCAA. And that litigation has, in one form or another, been ongoing for the last 20 years. Some of you may recall Ed O'Bannon, the UCLA basketball player, had an NIL suit against the NCAA approximately 10, 15 years ago. Several states, including the state of Florida, then passed legislation that stepped in and mandated student athletes be permitted to monetize their NIL without penalty. In particular, the state of Florida statute recites the legislature finds that intercollegiate athletics provide intercollegiate athletes with significant educational opportunities. However, participation in intercollegiate athletics should not infringe upon an intercollegiate athlete's ability to earn compensation for his or her name, image, or likeness. The law went into effect July 1, 2021, so we're in NIL world now. So in addition to that, the NCAA recently lost a related legal challenge to the NCAA rule on NIL prohibition under antitrust law, which concluded with a decision at the Supreme Court of the United States. The decision was rendered in June of last month, actually. So with NIL arriving, the NCAA saw the writing on the wall and suspended its NIL rules that formerly governed this type of compensation, which was under NCAA Rule 18.5. NCAA will provide a permanent solution eventually. They're going to work on new rules. They provide some guidelines on their website, which I'll link to in the description for this video. So what is Florida's new NIL law? The state of Florida implemented its NIL law at section 1006.74. You go take a look at it. I'll link that too, but not much to it. And 10 other states also passed NIL legislation in some form. And some of them were not, all of them were a bit different. So you'll have to review the NIL law for whichever state that you currently reside in. Indeed, in addition to that, the state laws didn't provide a lot of formal framework on how to work this out. Like the Florida statute is quite succinct, and they've pretty much left that type of nit and gritty regulation to each individual educational institution. Not only does the law vary state by state, the form of implementation may vary from school to school. Because of this, you need to review the rules passed by your school's athletic association. So what does this exactly mean for student athletes in Florida? So the recent NIL changes permit student athletes to derive compensation from NIL rights. The most common form for student athletes will be endorsement deals. Commonly, this means the student athlete will endorse a product in exchange for compensation. Of course, this is not the wild, wild west. I've heard a new NIL regime described as that, and that is not correct. You need to keep it within the rails, so to speak. Doesn't mean if your Heisman Trophy Trophy winning quarterback can sign with Nike when the school is an Under Armour school. That's a conflicting endorsement. And the actual statute, one of the few guardrails statute here in Florida provides is conflicting endorsements are not permitted. And so because of this, most schools will pass rules prohibiting competing endorsements. And how do you figure out what something is competing or conflicting with an existing endorsement for the school? So because of this, student athletes will need to constantly review NIL rules at their school to stay within the rules. To this end, Florida registration, again, the Florida legislation sets some guardrails, no conflicting deals, disclosure of NIL deals to the respective school, no pay for play. And that's a whole nother ball of yarn, so to speak. But each school has different rules. For example, Florida, University of Florida requires disclosure within 4 days. Florida State might be different. University of Miami might be different. Different states may be totally different. So you need to be on top of that. In addition to endorsement deals, student athletes with large social media presences will be able to monetize their following now. If you have a large following, on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, you can now accept monetization and compensation from the platforms you couldn't previously. Now you can. You can also sell tweets. You can sell Instagram posts. They're going to tag a commercial product. You can do that now. You can also receive personal compensation for personal appearances. So you may be able, as I believe the University of Miami quarterback just recently did, you can receive compensation for personal appearances at nightclubs. But you want to blow that by your athletic department and your disclosure requirements so that they can approve it and decide whether they're going to apply other standards to a name, image, and likeness. Because I wouldn't be shocked if some schools are going to add some type of morality requirement. You know, they're not going to allow you to go do a personal appearance at the local strip club. It's just something that's probably going to start to show up. And again, NIL law expressly prohibits pay for play. You cannot be compensated for your play. How they're going to separate NIL from that, it's going to be a whole nother framework of regulation that I'm sure the schools are going to get on top of. And also, this only applies to intercollegiate student athletes, not high school athletes. Famously, just recently, last week, a very talented high school basketball player signed an NIL deal. In Florida, that's not available for high school athletes at this point. In some other states, it might be. So that's something you need to, for very talented young athletes in high school, you might want to consider that option. You have to decide how that's going to affect your eligibility for high school athletics and whether you actually care, depending on how talented you are realistically. So which athletes will benefit most? I think this is pretty common sense, but technically all student athletes are going to benefit equally from the new opportunities. But equal rights does not necessarily mean equal compensation. You know, Heisman Trophy winning quarterback returning for senior year. You know, let's say Mac Jones from Alabama had returned last year. This year was decided to come back for another year. He would have more value than the third string offensive tackle on the same team. It's just going to be a free market economy. So he would get more NIL compensation than perhaps the third stringer would. But so although most attention will understandably go to the revenue sports, that being football, basketball, some non-revenue sports student athletes are going to benefit from this too. Particular ones who have large social media followings. I've understand that some non-revenue sports athletes have large Instagram followings. I mean, if you got 500,000 Instagram followers and you got a blue check mark, you can do a lot with that. You can actually derive some revenue, and now you can do that because that's in essence your name, image, and likeness. The last question is, can athletes hire lawyers to help with NIL laws? Yes, absolutely. Student athletes in Florida may hire attorneys to assist them with NIL efforts. We tend to think, as being an IP boutique, the intellectual property attorneys are well suited for that because we have decades of experience in negotiating licensing contracts and formalizing trademark rights before the USPTO. And we think that we would be best suited for that. So we would hope that you would think of us. But regardless of who you hire, you should hire an attorney versus, for example, a marketing agent. Compensation is different, of course. A marketing agent is going to take a piece of your NIL deal, but An attorney has full loyalty, is ethically required to have loyalty to the client, and we have to maintain a non-conflicted state when it comes to compensation. It's a heavily regulated part of the practice of law here in the state of Florida. So with that, I shall conclude my presentation. Thank you for your time. The last slide is my contact information: email, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. No, I'm not on the TikTok, but if you have a big TikTok following, feel free to reach out to us if you're looking to enter into this new NIL regime. Thank you.